My dad mocked me, saying, "A soldier can't sing." To humiliate me, he forced me to perform at the Veterans Gala. I sang just one verse, and suddenly the entire room of generals went silent. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs turned to my father, his eyes wide. "Sir, that song, it's the forbidden anthem of Ghost Team 7. My dad's face went pale. He finally realized what he had done. I never thought my father's casual cruelty would hand me the perfect weapon. But last night, at a glitzy Veterans Gala, I took his stage, and with one whispered song, I brought a hidden truth screaming back to life. My name is Serena Caldwell, I'm 38. For 16 years, I served in the United States Army, mostly in military intelligence and tactical field liaison. Most people don't really know what that means, and honestly, that's kind of the point. A lot of what I did is filed away in redacted memos, buried deep in archives no one talks about in public. But last night, everyone in that room talked about it, without saying a single word. It was supposed to be a harmless evening, a Veterans Gala. The kind of 1,000-plate event where retired colonels, defense contractors, and 3-star generals sip whiskey and pretend to remember the names of the young soldiers they left behind. Flags draped everywhere, stiff linen napkins, silverware clinking against expensive china. My father, a retired general himself, was right there in the center of it all. He sat at the main table, all his ribbons gleaming, every one of his war stories polished to perfection. He was the evening's MC, the keynote speaker, the veteran of record. And me? I was the side act. His daughter, the entertainment. He introduced me with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. And now my daughter, Serena, will grace us with something heartfelt. She always had a thing for singing. Let's hope this one lands. The laughter that followed was light, controlled, polite. It was my cue. I walked onto the stage alone. No spotlight, no piano, no microphone. Just a plain black dress, my boots silent on the hardwood floor, and the ache of a memory pressing against my chest. I didn't greet the crowd. I didn't look for my father's face. I just started to sing. If I fall in silence, bury me in sound. If my name is missing, let the echoes be found. The room shifted. It was subtle at first. A clink of silverware that didn't continue. A breath held too long. The waiter closest to the stage stopped mid-pour, his hand frozen above a champagne flute. The temperature in the room dropped, not literally, but in that way a space does when someone speaks a truth that wasn't supposed to be spoken. The melody was simple, Bear. My voice wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. It carried weight, the kind only the forgotten ever truly know. By the second line, the air had thickened. Chairs creaked. Someone stood up in the back. Then a voice broke through the silence. It was commanding, not angry, but stunned. Stop. Every head turned. It was General Arthur Wexley, the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. He stood slowly, his eyes locked on my father. "Sir, that song, it's the anthem of Ghost Team 7. The forbidden anthem." My father froze. His hands clenched on the edge of the table. Color drained from his face. From the stage, I saw his jaw slacken, his eyes dart. But he didn't speak. I didn't stop singing. I couldn't. Because I knew exactly what that song meant. I knew what it carried. And I knew what it revealed. My father had just exposed a secret he'd spent 15 years helping to bury, all by forcing me, his own daughter, to sing it as a joke. A few hours earlier, I stood behind that velvet curtain, waiting for my turn. The gala buzzed with polished laughter and the clinking of champagne flutes. My father stood confidently at the podium, his voice booming with pride, not for me, but for himself. My daughter Serena served too, not in the way most of us did, of course. She had her own special contributions. He didn't wink, but his tone did the winking for him. She's here to sing us a little tune. Something sentimental, I'm told. Let's give her a hand, she could use the encouragement. More laughter, a few scattered claps. Someone muttered, "A singing soldier." That's new. Behind the curtain, I adjusted my collar. My throat was dry, but not from nerves. It was anticipation. I had made my choice days ago. I wasn't here to entertain. I was here to test a truth. He didn't know the song I picked. He didn't know the weight it carried. And he definitely didn't know that he was the reason I had carried it in silence for so long. Ghost Team 7 wasn't a name you'd find in any public archive. It wasn't even a real unit, not officially. It was born in the aftermath of a failed extraction in northern Africa, a place where flags were pulled down and patches were stripped from uniforms before the first shot was fired. A black team. A shadow cell. Forgotten by design. I had been the only communications specialist in that unit. And we'd written our own kind of anthem. Not one for glory, but for memory. It had never been recorded, never been sung publicly. It lived only in the breath of those who carried the weight of what we'd done and what we lost. When my father handed me that stage, he thought he was humiliating me, that I would crumble under polite ridicule. He didn't realize I was walking toward a truth he'd spent years hiding behind rank and reputation. And now, in a room filled with polished medals and unspoken debts, I was about to unwrap it, note by painful note. Not for applause, not for revenge, but because some names don't get etched in marble. Some names only survive in song. My father never saw me as a real soldier. He never said it outright, not in those exact words, but it was in the way he introduced me, the way his voice changed when people asked what his daughter did in the army. His tone got vague, his phrasing mechanical. She worked with some intelligence people, communications, not combat, you know. But I do know. I know that not combat is his polite way of saying not enough. I wasn't one of the guys kicking down doors or leading patrols through desert towns. I didn't carry a rifle into firefights. I didn't earn blood stripes or battlefield commendations the way he did in his glory days. And, because of that, everything I did accomplish never really counted to him. What he didn't mention, what he never wanted to understand, is that I coordinated 3 high-risk extractions across conflict zones where even medevacs wouldn't fly. I decoded encrypted transmissions from insurgent groups fast enough to prevent 2 ambushes. And I was embedded for 16 months straight in the northern corridor, relaying intelligence through firewalls, field static, and absolute chaos. The only reason I didn't carry a gun more often was because I was too busy keeping people alive with information. But none of that mattered to him, because I sang. He caught me once after a long mission, sitting by a tent in the DMZ, humming an old hymn I used to hear in church. My throat was raw, my uniform stained with sand. I wasn't trying to perform. I was trying to remember who I was before all of it. He looked at me and shook his head. Soldiers don't sing. Not out here. That was the first time he said it aloud. He didn't shout. He didn't insult me. But the dismissal in his voice sank deeper than any insult ever could. From that moment on, I stopped singing when he was near. Not out of obedience, but because I understood the rule. My voice was a threat to how he wanted to remember me. To him, a soldier was built on silence, grit, and action. Anything that sounded like softness, grief, music, vulnerability was a crack in the armor. But the irony is, I never felt like more of a soldier than when I was singing in the dark. I once sat beside a 23-year-old corporal named Brandon, who had a piece of shrapnel buried too deep for the medics to remove in the field. He was fading, panicking, begging to hear a human voice. So I sang. Just a lullaby, one my mother used to hum when the world felt too big. His breath slowed. His hand unclenched. And when the light in his eyes went out, there was no silence. There was music. I carried his dog tag in my front pocket for the rest of that mission. And I kept singing. Not because I needed to be heard, but because someone needed to be remembered. Still, even after all of that, when I came home on leave and sat across the dinner table from my father, he asked, "So, when are you going to apply for a real promotion? Maybe move into command?" I told him I wasn't interested in command. You'd rather sit in a room listening to headphones and humming? That's not exactly the army I know. That was the second time he said it. By then, I'd stopped defending myself. He wasn't asking to understand. He was asking to remind me I didn't measure up to him. That whatever I was building, whoever I was becoming, it still didn't look enough like him. I thought maybe one day he'd see. Maybe he'd hear what my voice had carried through the years: fear, hope, memory. Maybe he'd understand that sometimes the strongest thing a soldier can do is feel. But that moment never came. At least, not yet. So I sang in the shadows. In VA hospitals, in recovery wards, at funerals where the flag was folded 3 times, but no one remembered the tune they used to whistle in the back of the Humvee. I sang for them. Not for glory, not for pride, just so someone would know that once they were heard. But even then, somewhere deep down, I wanted him to hear me too. Maybe not the words, but the weight. Maybe someday he'd realize that singing didn't make me less of a soldier, it made me one. And the moment he called me up on that gala stage, expecting a joke, expecting weakness, I knew that someday had finally arrived. They say war strips everything away from a person, their name, their softness, their voice. But for me, voice was the only thing I had left to give when nothing else made sense. Especially during Operation Blackmore, the Northern Campaign nobody put in press briefings, where most of us were labeled recon support and then quietly removed from record when the mission went sideways. That's where Ghost Team 7 disappeared. Not all at once. Bit by bit. By dust. By silence. By order. I was stationed at Compost Kilo, a low-profile insertion team tasked with intercepting signals and guiding night raids. It was cold, dusty, forgotten territory. Most days blurred into static and decrypted radio chatter. But I remember every voice I heard go quiet. There was a guy, Harris, Corporal. Texas. Sarcasm in his blood. Never left his corner without a harmonica in his shirt pocket. We weren't close at first. I was quiet. He was loud. But somewhere between losing air support and watching 3 of our techs get pulled off the evac manifest, we started talking more. Or maybe I started listening. He once told me, if I die here, Caldwell, you better not let the dust erase me. You hear me? You sing. You sing like the wind owes us something. I thought he was joking. Until he wasn't. It was a Tuesday morning. We had been up all night tracking heat signatures near Sector Delta, and Harris was assigned as rear cover. His transmission never came through. A perimeter sweep found nothing. No blood, no body, no boots. Just an imprint in the dirt, like someone had been lifted straight off the earth without permission. We filed it as MIA, but we knew. Ghost Team 7 always knew. And that night, with the wind howling over an empty ridge, I sang. Not because I was good at it. Not because it changed anything. But because no one else would. I didn't even remember where the song came from. It had formed over campfires, inside half-burned tents, traded word by word like currency among those of us who refused to be forgotten. We had no name for it. Just called it the song. If I fall in silence, bury me in sound. If my name is missing, let the echoes be found. It was barely more than a whisper. A rhythm born of grief, carried in memory. No official record of it ever existed. No MP3. No log sheet. Just verses scratched into a corner of my notebook, passed between team members like a pact. Ghost Team 7 didn't get medals. We got reassigned. We got erased. Our final mission was absorbed into an intelligence report stamped, classified red zone failure. And then nothing. I kept that notebook through 3 redeployments. Kept it after I left the service. Kept it when no one else remembered Harris. My father certainly didn't. He had heard of ghost teams, dismissed them as experimental, too soft for real combat, he said once. He never asked where I'd been stationed. Never asked who I lost. Just assumed if I came home without visible scars, then the rest must have been easy. But he didn't hear what I heard. Didn't hear Harris gasping into his headset, whispering, "Not yet." Didn't hear Petty Officer Lance weeping in the dark because he couldn't remember his daughter's voice. Didn't hear the wind clawing through the blackout tents as if it was searching for someone to carry home. He didn't know that sometimes a song is all you have when the world decides someone never existed. So I carried it. Through discharge, through therapy, through civilian life, and back into the shadows. I never sang it in public. Not even for veterans groups. I told myself it wasn't mine to sing out loud. It belonged to those who never got the chance. But the gala changed that. When my father signed me up to perform as a joke, when he stood on that stage full of pride and arrogance, believing I was nothing more than background music, I realized something. He had helped bury the truth. But I had kept the voice. So I pulled the song out of the past. I dusted off the lines. I remembered the harmony Harris hummed off-key during night watch. I closed my eyes, opened my mouth, and brought them back. Not for my father. For Harris. For Ghost Team 7. For everyone who fell in silence so I could still sing. The phone call didn't start with a hello. My father's voice came through like a command, crisp, matter-of-fact, as if I were still a cadet and he was still active duty. The Veterans Gala is next month. I put your name down for something. I paused. Something. He continued. They needed a filler between the drum corps and the keynote. Figured you could do one of your songs. One of my songs. He said it like I collected them the way children collect marbles. Frivolous, unnecessary, something best left in the attic. There was no pride in his tone, no warmth, just the casual confidence of a man who thought the world owed him a favor. And I was part of that debt. I stayed quiet. Silence had always been my safest weapon around him. He continued, "You'll go on around 7:40. Shouldn't be too hard. Just pick something patriotic. Nothing too slow. And keep it under 4 minutes. No invitation. No, would you like to? Just assignment." I let the silence stretch a beat longer, then said, "Sure." He sounded surprised. "Really?" "Yeah," I said. "Why not?" I could feel his satisfaction through the receiver. Even though he never said thank you, for him, my compliance was enough. What he didn't realize, what he never could have imagined, was that I already knew what I would sing. And it wasn't the Star-Spangled Banner. To him, the gala was just another night to shake hands and collect nods from other men who called him Colonel, even though he'd been retired over a decade. A room full of decorated war stories and glossy business cards from people who turned wars into contracts. It was theater, and he loved the stage. But for me, the stage was sacred. Not because I wanted to be the center of attention, far from it, but because for the first time in my life, he had handed me a microphone. He had no idea what he was inviting into the room with it. He thought he was putting me in my place. He didn't know that place came with a voice. And not just any voice. Our voice. The one we created in the dirt. In the silence. In the back corners of failed missions no one wanted to claim. The voice of Ghost Team 7. The voice of men and women who were stripped of their names and remembered only by those who didn't forget. I'd carried that voice quietly for years. In notebooks. In the breaths between intelligence briefings. In the hum beneath my ribs when I couldn't sleep. And now, thanks to my father's need for applause, I had an audience. I hadn't seen him in person in over a year. Our last conversation ended in disagreement. Something small, something stupid, probably about how I never applied for a higher command. I hadn't wanted to come back to his world of polished boots and staged legacies, but something about this invitation felt different. Intentional. Maybe it was the way he said filler. Maybe it was the way he didn't ask, just assigned. Or maybe it was something deeper, an instinct I had honed over a lifetime of dodging emotional landmines with him. He wanted to remind me where I stood, that I was a soldier by paperwork only, that my time in service, no matter how long, no matter how painful, still sat beneath his in-worth. And maybe, just maybe, he wanted to humiliate me. I could see it already. Me standing under dim light, singing some overdone patriotic tune while the crowd scrolled through their phones and politely clapped when it ended. He'd smile. He'd clap the loudest. And afterward, he'd say, "You were brave to try something different." Which really meant you were brave to try it at all, even knowing you couldn't win. I wasn't interested in winning. I was interested in remembering. So, I chose the forbidden song. The one that had no sheet music. The one no one dared sing above a whisper. The one that had lived in my throat since the night Harris disappeared. It wasn't for the generals. It wasn't for the contractors or the donors or the brass polishers in the back rows. It was for Ghost Team 7. And it was for me. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do in front of a crowd that thinks they already know your story is tell the part they never expected to hear. I didn't rehearse in my living room. I didn't warm up scales in the mirror or record myself for pitch. There was no hairbrush for a microphone, no set list taped to the wall. When you're singing something that isn't supposed to exist, there's no point in practicing like you're preparing for applause. So instead, I drove out to Section 45B of the Arlington National Cemetery. The part tucked furthest from the tour paths. No statues, no fancy commemorative stones, Just rows of the same white markers, names, dates, wars they weren't supposed to die in. And I sat, not on a bench, not like a visitor. I sat in the dirt between two graves whose names I didn't know, under a sky that felt too quiet for what I carried in my throat. I didn't come to sing pretty. I came to remember. The first note came rough. I didn't try to polish it. I let it tremble. Let it break. Because that's how it sounded the first time I heard it, beneath a torn tent flap in the middle of the desert, from a voice trying to stay alive long enough to finish the chorus. If I fall in silence, bury me in sound. It was never meant to be performed. It was never written for crowds. It was a song whispered between soldiers who knew they might never be buried properly. A song for those who would vanish from rosters and headlines and memory. A song for the ghosts. As I sang each line, I imagined the faces. Harris laughing with a mouthful of protein bar. Lance hunched over a map, tracing extraction points with his pinky. Torres, who braided her hair even when no one would see it. None of them made it home. None of them got a eulogy. And yet, sitting there in Section 45B, I felt them closer than I ever had in a crowded room. I didn't look around to see if anyone was watching. I wasn't afraid of being overheard. Most people walked past that section without stopping. And those who did stop, they understood. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The weight came from the pause between words, from the way the air caught in my chest before the second verse, from the memory of Harris grabbing my hand in the back of a Humvee and saying, "If I disappear, don't let me go quiet." For years, I'd kept that promise silently. I'd hum the tune in my head when I couldn't sleep. I'd mouth the lyrics in waiting rooms and field tents. But I never let the words out, because once they were spoken, they would become real. And once they became real, they could be taken away. But now my father had handed me a microphone, a room full of generals, a stage, and time. He thought he was giving me rope to embarrass myself. But all he did was unlock a door he thought was sealed. So I came to the cemetery to rehearse not the melody, but the truth. To remind myself why I couldn't soften the edges, why I couldn't clean it up or pick something safer, why I couldn't dilute the song to fit inside a polite evening program. I wasn't going to perform it. I was going to deliver it. Like a coded message meant only for the ones who would recognize it. I finished the last note as the sun began to dip. My voice cracked on the final word. I let it. Some things aren't supposed to be polished. As I stood up and brushed the dust from my pants, I looked around and realized I wasn't alone. A man, older, maybe late 60s, stood off to the side, civilian clothes, ball cap in hand. He didn't say anything, just nodded once. Solemn. Familiar. On his wrist, beneath the sleeve of his flannel shirt, I saw it, a faded tattoo. GT7. He didn't smile. He didn't come closer. Just turned and walked away. I didn't follow because I didn't need to. Some voices don't need to be loud to be heard. Some songs don't need stages to matter. And some rehearsals aren't rehearsals at all, they're remembrance. There's a unique kind of isolation that comes from surviving something no one believes happened. When the world tells you that what you remember isn't written anywhere. When even your own family dismisses your experience as exaggeration or fabrication, you start to doubt whether it was real at all. But then a stranger walks up, taps your shoulder, and shows you ink older than your entire career. Ink that matches your memory. And you realize you were never crazy. You were just quiet. Because that's what survivors do. We don't shout, we sing. We hum the pain into corners. We bury it in verse. We hold it in our throats until someone else hears the tune and says, "I know that one." That man didn't need to say anything. His silence was a language I hadn't spoken aloud in years. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty, when I opened my mouth on stage that night, at that gala full of generals and power and control, someone would understand. Someone would hear the weight behind the melody. And someone, maybe not everyone, but someone would know this wasn't a performance. It was a resurrection. The lights were too bright. They always are in ballrooms like this. Overhead fixtures designed to spotlight medals and hairlines, not emotion. The room was all gold accents and polished steel, with the kind of shine that made every surface feel like it was watching. My heels clicked once on the stage floor, and then the room fell quiet. Not because of me. No one knew who I was. They were settling out of habit, trained by decades of ceremonies and military decorum to give attention to the next speaker or singer or harmless interlude. I reached the microphone. My palms were steady. My voice wasn't caught in my throat. I didn't even feel nervous, just cold, like the air had forgotten how to hold warmth. I didn't look for him. My father was somewhere in the front third of the room, I was sure of it, probably sitting straight back, chin tilted slightly, a glass of something amber-colored in his hand. I didn't need to see his face to know what expression he wore. Polite expectation bordering on restrained embarrassment. I didn't greet the audience. I didn't thank anyone for the opportunity. I didn't smile. I just began. If I fall in silence, bury me in sound. The words barely filled the space at first. There was no reverb, no echo, just my voice and the velvet stillness of a room full of strangers, too dignified to whisper, too conditioned to interrupt. But then something happened. Around the fifth row, a man's head lifted, his brows creased. He tilted slightly to the side like he was trying to hear something he hadn't expected. A table to the left shifted. A fork clinked gently against porcelain. In the back, someone lowered their phone. By the second line, the tension had changed. I could feel it, not as volume, but as absence. The absence of coughs, of shuffles, of that subtle, well-practiced indifference that filled most gala performances. The absence of noise told me everything I needed to know. They were listening. And not just listening, they were hearing. Because this wasn't a song built to impress. It wasn't clean. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't safe. It was a melody born in chaos, nursed in silence, buried under 100 unmarked events. It carried no official seal, no recognition, no protocol. But it carried truth. I sang the second verse slower. If my name is missing, let the echoes be found. The air thickened. Not dramatically, not in a cinematic way, but in that subtle, suffocating way that fills a room when people realize they're hearing something they weren't supposed to hear. The generals in the front row stopped fidgeting. A woman from the DoD leaned forward in her chair. Somewhere to my right, I heard a glass set down gently on a linen-covered table. I still hadn't looked at my father. I didn't need to, because in that moment, I could feel him. Trapped. Trapped by the realization of what I was singing. Trapped by the memory he thought no one would ever resurrect. Trapped by the unmistakable lines of a song that was never written down, only carried from throat to throat like a secret prayer passed between ghosts. And now it was out. On stage. In public. In front of the men and women who had once signed off on silence, like it was strategy. I let the last note fall into the quiet. No vibrato, no dramatic hold, just a clean end, like the way a breath leaves a body unannounced. For 3 seconds, no one moved. I counted 1, 2, 3. Then came the shift. It was subtle at first, a slight intake of breath. A single pair of hands raised to clap, but stopped midway. And then a voice, low, heavy, commanding, stop. Every neck turned toward it. A man had risen, tall, lean, with silver hair and a chest full of stars. General Arthur Wexley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs. He was no stranger to decorum. But now he stood in complete violation of it, staring straight ahead with an expression that sent a ripple through the room. He didn't speak to me. He looked at my father and said, "Sir, that song, it's the forbidden anthem of Ghost Team 7. The words landed like shrapnel. I didn't move, didn't flinch. But inside, I felt something shift. A silence cracking open like old ground finally giving way after too long holding the weight. My father didn't stand. He didn't speak. But in that moment, in the way his body stilled, the way the color drained from his face, the way his pride turned to ash, I knew he had heard me. And, more importantly, I knew he understood what I had just done. The silence didn't break. It fractured. General Wexley's voice had landed like a siren only a few could hear. But those who did, they changed. Their faces drained of color. Their postures stiffened, not out of discipline, but fear. Recognition. Ghost Team 7. He had said it aloud. No one said it aloud. I had heard whispers over the years. Old intel officers speaking in riddles over cups of bitter coffee. Retired field commanders who blinked a little too slowly when you asked about certain operations. But I never heard the name spoken with full breath in public until tonight. Until a five-star general stood and broke decades of silence. And he did it with fear in his eyes. The audience didn't clap. They didn't shift. They didn't even breathe. It was as if someone had taken the entire room and hung it in amber. The younger officers, the ones under 50, looked around confused. They didn't know the name. That was by design. Ghost Team 7 was erased long before they ever pinned their first rank. The rest, those old enough to remember, did. They remembered the desert. They remembered the blackout. They remembered the disappearances. And now they remembered me. I saw one man, an old colonel in full dress uniform, slowly lower himself into his chair, hand over his mouth like he'd just witnessed a funeral. My gaze swept the room once, and then I let it land, finally, on my father. He wasn't pale, he was gray. His knuckles were white around the stem of his wine glass. His jaw moved, but his lips didn't open. He looked as though he'd been hit in the chest and was still calculating whether it had been fatal. He didn't look at me. He looked at Wexley. But that didn't matter, because the judgment wasn't in Wexley's face. It was in the room's oxygen. He could feel it. The weight of a secret unearthed. The sting of a legacy unraveling. He had once told me, there are songs you don't sing. Not if you want to keep your career. I had just sung one. In front of 400 careers. Wexley stepped forward, not toward me, but toward the center aisle. His voice was low now, speaking to no one and everyone at once. This anthem was never authorized. It was never meant to exist. But it did. We know it did. His eyes moved in my direction, but he didn't address me by name. He didn't have to. Someone remembered someone who was there. Another murmur, then silence again. A woman 3 tables from the front, Air Force, whispered something to the man beside her. He nodded once slowly. Recognition. She knew or knew someone who had known. A ripple, not of noise but of realization, passed through the room. There had been stories of an elite recon unit formed in the early 2000s. Off books. Burned before it was ever acknowledged. Missions denied even in classified logs. Names wiped. Families told only they died in training. And at the center of that silence? My father. Not just a bystander. A signer. The directive to erase Ghost Team 7 hadn't floated down from some ambiguous cloud of authority. It had passed through his office. Through his pen. Through his decision. He had once told me war was won by those willing to do what others wouldn't. But he never expected that I'd be willing to remember what he wouldn't. That song wasn't just a melody. It was a cipher. A fingerprint. A signal flare fired straight into the polished ceiling of a ballroom full of ghosts pretending to be clean. And now it couldn't be unsung. General Wexley faced the crowd again. This time with a voice edged in finality. This changes everything. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to, because everyone in that room knew. This wasn't just about a song. This was about accountability. Memory. The unburied truth. I held my ground. I didn't step down from the stage. Behind me, the flag fluttered slightly from the AC vent. Red, white, and the shade of history no one wanted to name. And my father? He still hadn't moved. Because there is no protocol for what happens when the past sings louder than your rank. The morning after I sang, the world shifted. I didn't sleep. I didn't even take off my boots. The hotel room smelled like leftover cologne and unspoken tension. Outside the window, the city kept breathing like nothing happened. But in my chest, something old and heavy stirred. At 6:07 a.m., my phone rang. Unknown number. I already knew who it would be. Sergeant Caldwell, a calm voice said, "You're requested for a closed-door inquiry at the office of the chairman, 0930. Details to follow. Not invited. Requested." I sat for a while, staring at the wall. My father hadn't called. He hadn't texted. Not even a meaningless apology wrapped in diplomacy. I didn't need it. He wasn't the one I sang for. But he was the one who had something to lose. When I arrived, they didn't make me wait. A Marine escort led me through unfamiliar corridors. Carpet too thick, walls too silent, the kind of place where every breath gets documented. Inside, it wasn't a courtroom. Not yet. But it might as well have been. 3 men sat behind a long wooden table. One was a lawyer, another a general I didn't recognize. The third, the vice chair of the Joint Chiefs. The room was cold. Not from temperature, but from history. "Sergeant," the vice chair said, motioning to the seat, "you've stirred something we thought long buried." I didn't speak. I learned the power of silence in combat. Let them fill it. He tapped a file. Ghost Team 7 was never meant to exist. Officially, it still doesn't. But that song predates the program. It was oral, coded, an emotional anchor for agents beyond the wire. How did you know it? My voice didn't tremble. I was there. Northern Corridor, Operation Black Ribbon, 2012. The room froze. The vice chair looked up slowly. "You were on the embedded medical team?" "No, sir," I said. "I was listed as psychological warfare support, but my field orders were ghost designated." He leaned back. "Then you're one of 5. We thought only 3 survived." I nodded once. The rest didn't. I watched them die. I buried Harris myself. His jaw tightened. And the song. He made me promise I'd remember it, that I'd sing it. Not for applause, but for memory. He folded his hands. "Do you know what you've done, Sergeant?" I met his gaze. I gave the forgotten their names back. The silence afterward wasn't hostile. It was respect. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Reverent. The lawyer cleared his throat. "There will be inquiries. Your father's role in suppressing Ghost Team 7 will come under scrutiny. So will the medals, the funding, the paper trail." I looked straight at him. He wanted to forget. I couldn't. That's the difference. They dismissed me without ceremony. I left the room lighter than I entered. Not victorious. This wasn't a war. But something had broken open. And not just for me. Back in the elevator, I found a folded note tucked in my uniform jacket pocket. No name, just one sentence in block print. "You sang for all of us. We heard you." I folded it back slowly. I wasn't alone anymore. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had truly served. Not by orders. Not by rank. But by remembrance. 3 days after the gala, I received a quiet request to report to a military archive facility. Remote, windowless, and buried in a hillside outside Arlington. No briefing, no uniform required. Just me, a badge, and a silent escort who never asked my name. Inside, the cold was different. Not from temperature, but from time. Everything here was still. Paper still. Memory still. A clerk led me to a terminal. No words, just a gesture. A beige folder sat sealed in front of me, its flap marked in red, access by joint order only. Yet someone had cleared my ID. Inside were images first. Black and white reconnaissance photos from the Northern Corridor. Grainy yet unmistakable. I knew the buildings. I knew the scorched earth. Then came names. Harris. Torres. Miles. Mine, with a question mark beside it. Then I found it. Page 47, top right corner, Operation Black Ribbon. Middle, authorization for asset withdrawal. Bottom signature, Lieutenant General Thomas Caldwell. My father. He hadn't just known. He had approved the withdrawal of support. Pulled extraction. Signed off on our abandonment. My chest didn't tighten. My fingers didn't shake. I didn't cry. Not here. Not in this mausoleum of secrets. I turned the page. Addendum. Reason for withdrawal. Operational containment. Team deemed non-recoverable. Risks to classified technologies high. Personnel loss acceptable. Acceptable. That word lodged in my throat like shrapnel. We weren't soldiers. We were risk calculations. Disposables. And my father? He'd calculated it. It wasn't just dereliction. It was deliberate. I sat back and stared at the signature. I knew that handwriting. Slanted left, crisp, always slightly tilted upward like it was proud of itself. He used that signature on my high school recommendation letter. On my ROTC acceptance. On my first leave pass. He had signed me into the army and signed others out of life. I took a photo. I wasn't supposed to, but ghosts don't follow rules. As I stood to leave, the clerk reappeared, almost ghost-like himself. He handed me a smaller file. Unlogged, he whispered. Inside, a memo dated 2 months after Operation Black Ribbon. It was brief, unclassified, meant to disappear. Subject: morale and culture disruption. Proposal to erase Ghost Team 7 from records to prevent symbolic uprising among Special Forces units. Justification: emotional attachment to the fallen is interfering with operational clarity. Recommend cultural erasure to protect future missions. Signed again, Thomas Caldwell. He hadn't just abandoned us. He had tried to delete us. No medals. No obituaries. No families notified. Just a black hole in the record. But he made one mistake. He let one of us live. Me. And when he stood at that gala, forcing me on stage to perform like a showpiece, he had no idea the song I'd choose was the very memory he tried to erase. He thought he controlled the narrative. But narratives, like wounds, reopen. I left the archive without speaking. Outside, a drizzle began to fall, soft and indifferent. It didn't matter. Nothing could wash this away. Later that night, I sat on my hotel bed. The file opened beside me. I didn't want revenge, not the loud kind. What I wanted was recognition. For the ones who didn't come back. For Harris, who died whispering lyrics into the sand. For the soldiers whose dog tags were never returned. My father's downfall wasn't orchestrated. It was organic. A truth rising like steam from a buried fire. And all I did was sing. The song had done the rest. 2 weeks after the inquiry, I received a letter postmarked from Ohio. It came in a plain white envelope. No return address, just my name, handwritten in blue ink with a slight tremble to the strokes. At first, I thought it was another anonymous critic. After the gala, the internet had plenty to say. Some called me a hero, others called me a traitor. I stopped reading most of it. But something about this envelope made me pause. I opened it slowly. Inside was a folded sheet of lined paper, the kind you find in old spiral notebooks. The handwriting was neat, careful, the kind of writing people used when they believed words should be legible, even when your hands were shaking. It began, "Dear Sergeant Caldwell, my name is Janice Harris. I'm writing to you not as a critic or an officer or even a citizen, but as a mother." I sat down. "I don't know if you remember my son, Corporal Benjamin Harris. He served with you, I believe, in that unit no one's allowed to name. He never told me much. Said it was safer that way. Said there were things even a mother didn't need to know. But I knew when he stopped writing letters home that something had happened." My chest tightened. "I found out about the gala through a veterans group. They posted your performance. Said you sang something that made a 4-star general freeze in his seat. At first, I didn't know what they meant. Then I watched the video. What little someone managed to record on a phone. The sound was rough, but when I heard that first line, I had to pause it. You see, my son used to hum that tune before bed. Not just once, for months, every night. I thought it was something from a movie, something he picked up overseas. But he would never tell me where it came from. The lyrics. He only sang the first verse. Then he'd stop, smile, and say, 'That's enough for tonight, Ma.' I held the paper tighter. I watched your face when you sang it, and I saw what he must have seen in those final moments. Someone who didn't forget. Someone who kept the promise." I wiped my eyes. "You don't owe me an apology. I'm not writing for justice or answers. I'm writing because for the first time in 12 years, I feel like someone else remembers my boy. Not as a statistic or a footnote, but as a voice, a soul. Thank you for remembering him. Thank you for singing. Thank you for not letting the wind carry all of him away." The letter ended with a single sentence that broke something in me softly and fully. He used to hum that song in the kitchen, even while making toast. I didn't cry when Harris died. I didn't cry when they denied the unit ever existed. I didn't even cry at the inquiry. But I cried then. Not because of the war. Not because of my father. But because I remembered that exact moment. It was after a supply drop in the desert. We were exhausted, bone deep. The only food we had left was powdered eggs and stale crackers. Harris offered to cook. Called it desert toast. He whistled that tune the whole time. Said it was his way of keeping the dust out of his thoughts. And now his mother knew. She didn't need medals or monuments. She just needed to know her son wasn't forgotten. So I sat down and wrote back. I told her, yes, I remember him. He sang louder than the mortar fire. He laughed harder than our fear. He was our compass even when there was no map. I folded the letter, addressed the envelope, and, before I sealed it, I whispered the chorus one more time. Not for me. Not even for Harris. But for the people like Janice, who waited quietly for years, hoping someone would remember enough to sing back. I never thought I'd return to a classroom, especially not one with government clearance and cement walls. But here I was, back in D.C., teaching at a pilot program run quietly under the Pentagon. The official title was Humanitarian Communication Through Arts. But everyone called it what it really was, songs in uniform. These weren't music majors. They were soldiers. Young, restless, and tired from deployments. Some with scars that weren't on their skin. They didn't come here to learn scales. They came to remember how to feel. I didn't bring sheet music. I brought stories. I told them about the sandstorm that buried our comms equipment. How Harris once used Morse code to tap out a joke on a water canteen. How silence can scream louder than artillery. And how a song, when sung with truth, can reach where no strategy ever will. I told them I wasn't there to teach them how to sing. I was there to teach them how to listen to each other, to themselves, to the ghosts that still marched beside them. One morning, after a session that left most of us quiet, a young private stayed behind. He was lanky, his uniform too new, boots too stiff. He sat down and asked softly, "Ma'am, the song, the one you sang at the gala, was it real?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at his face, the hunger in his eyes to believe something still mattered. I thought of the graves with no names, the mothers who never got closure, the nights I had sung into nothing just to feel like I still had a voice. Finally, I smiled. "If you ever hear it again," I said, "in the middle of the night, through static or wind or memory, then yes, it's real." He nodded, said thank you, didn't ask anything else. And somehow that was enough. Because this was the new battlefield now. Hearts, not maps. Memories, not medals. And if one soldier walked out of that room remembering Harris's name, or the note that never made it onto a staff report, then I had done my job. I wasn't just teaching a class. I was passing the torch. There was no stage this time. No podium, no polished boots or silver stars in the front row. Just me, the grass, and the hush of dusk pressing against the backs of unnamed headstones. This wasn't a concert. It was a reckoning. The wind carried the first note before I did. And then I sang, not loud, not for anyone living, but steady, soft, the way Harris had when he whispered it under his breath while we waited for help that never came. There was no applause, only quiet. But in that stillness, I felt them. Harris, Jenna, Mads, Ghost Team 7. Each one standing without uniforms, without ranks, just memories stitched together by melody. I wasn't there to perform. I was there to remember. My father never came to this place. Maybe he couldn't. Or maybe he thought he didn't belong. He was right, in a way. This wasn't for the ones who issued orders. It was for the ones who followed them into the dark and never made it back. As the last note faded, I knelt. Not because it was ceremonial. Not because anyone was watching. But because it felt right. Because sometimes a song is all that remains of a life, and sometimes it's justice.